Thanks everyone for coming. This is a Collagraphy workshop. I'm Brian Fisher, a member of Quartermaster Press off and on for a long time. I think earlier this year when I was teaching a workshop with Ilse Reimnitz, I looked back, it's been 20 years since I first became a member, and then I've been able to slide in and out a couple times. So I really appreciate the group, and this is why I appreciate the group. You know, there's so much that creativity embodied in this press relationship, and it's evident on the walls here. So first I'll do a little bit of a history about collagraphy. Its name is alluding to a collage process, and collage, kala, is a Greek word for glue. So it has that component to it of sticking things to other things to build a plate. So it's a really simple process, but you can be, quite successful with simple materials. Earlier this year, or last year, actually about this time last year, Valerie Wilson taught several workshops, collagraph workshops, and so last year I mostly made collagraph prints. So this was done, actually remember on the island we did that death and dying as a whole island, as a whole island experiencing one subject matter and creating art out of it. So this is a Persephone cycle, and it is a collagraph. So it was made by gluing paper that I cut to plexiglass plates with polymer medium, and once that's done, then the inking becomes your life. It can be inked so many different ways. It's always a surprise. So other examples here are some that Debbie did. This is Debbie Shandling Crawford, and we have some of her plates. I want to hold these up too. So this piece here, this is the plate that it was made from. And I think this was a ghost, correct?
Yeah, that's it.
So this isn't the first press, it's the second press off the plate after she had inked it. And this is another over here, actually like this, like that. My approach is really simple. I am usually just using paper because I do this stencil process as much as part of my monotype. So it's kind of a natural thing for me to sit with some scissors and a knife and trim things and then compositionally arrange them. Debbie was experimenting with all kinds of other textures and found things from string to paper that had been formed with patterns in it, like this or this. You can see the string. And then this was modeling paste, right?
Yeah, that was modeling paste with a stencil.
Okay, so it creates a texture that holds the ink. When you're inking this, it can be inked as a relief, or it could be inked as a intaglio print, so wiping away the ink after it's been put on, or a combination of both. And so that's actually how this was done. The background colors that are the oranges and greens were put on first, and this dark brown was rolled on after the plate had been wiped to achieve that relief. To show you how simple this process is, first you have to take a lid off. This is polymer acrylic medium, and it's better if it's glossy because that aids in wiping the plate later on. And it attaches itself really well to itself, and plastic. So as I said earlier, I cut a lot of paper in the monotype process that I do. So, I was watching television the other night when I couldn't really do much else, and I just started, drawing and cutting these little things out. So, but that's exactly what I'm doing here today, is like taking some shapes that I'd previously cut out and then starting to create some composition with them. And all it takes is a brush and some acrylic medium and applying the acrylic medium to the plate. So you're using it as the glue and placing the element that I've cut out onto the plate. And so it can go relatively fast. One of the reasons that I think this is an exciting way to make a print is it totally gets you outside of your plan. So wonderful things happen, but they happen quickly, so that's exciting. Glenn Alps is the artist credited with the development of this process. His whole thing was about spontaneity. That was one of the things that he particularly wanted artists to be aware of. Print process didn't have to be some methodical thing that you had to do this before you could do that. You know, you could, with very inexpensive materials, he used a lot of wood, build a plate and out of cardboard and string and some kind of glue. So what's unique for this, for me, is the plexiglass. I'd used paper plates before to do this, but this makes a very permanent plate, indestructible. You could print these more times than you would want, than I would personally would want to wipe a plate, but I'd rather make a new plate. And that's part of the fun of this, is just the plate making. You know, then hopefully the print part's fun too. But I did want to point out one other kind of collagraph that's an example in the show, and that's my piece there, that double figure. It's called Alpha Beta. And that has a collagraph background, but it was not a plexiglass plate. It was a paper plate that I made to be used as a background. So, but again, it's something that happened relatively fast, and it's using lacquer and glue instead of acrylic medium to attach things with. So, one consideration for this is you don't want your materials to get too thick, and Debbie is like pressing the extreme a little bit.
Yeah.
Because you will emboss the paper when it goes through the press, but it can also tear the paper if it's, you know, too thick. So.
File folders are a nice thing.
Yes, yeah, manila file folders are very good thickness. Something else that one can do, that's if you have a press available to you, is embossing with the press. You're embossing your paper that you're going to be cutting out with the press before you use it. Okay. This will dry, probably at the end of the day, I could print that. That's how fast you can make a plate. And you could, obviously, you can see you can make a lot of plates in an afternoon. So I'm demoing then how to have a plate, I'll show you now, that I made in one of Valerie's workshops. And it is a combination of modeling paste. And of course, it was done in reverse so that when it's printed, it will read as recognizable letters. And then the bottom part of this was just done with those paper punches. And then this was something that I cut out to create a pretty simple plate and glue it all up. Here's another example. And I've been showing you this one. I'm going to pass a couple of these around too. Hello.
Can you take off this stuff?
I wouldn't bother. You could probably sand it to create something else that you could glue to, and it would be interesting. But the plexiglass is relatively inexpensive, and I haven't tried yet. Well, I will say also, some of the bigger plates I did just shellac, or not shellac, but use this to the point that they stopped really receiving a lot of ink, and then I glued some other things on top of them. So, yeah, you could reuse it that way probably. Okay.
On this one, Brian, after everything was on, did you then recoat the whole thing with?
I did.
It feels like there's a layer.
Yeah, and that one actually has the carbonundrum grit on top too, which is a material that's like a pumice-like material that can catch ink. It's, you know, you again attach it by putting down a coat of this, and then I think you created a kind of a pounce so that it could create an even, so supposedly even texture, or through a stencil. That one was through a stencil. So there are all kinds of ways to approach making texture in this process, and it's pretty much like if you can glue it down and it's thin enough to go through a press, you will have something that's interesting. There's one example out on the collector's wall of Lord David Heiser's sunflowers out there, and it's a ghost, but it was done. She used, the original was corduroy pants, I think she'd cut up, and made this wonderful sunflower from. But I remember that her initial pieces they had so much ink on it. And it was always the Ghost that was way better than the first print, so.
Can I talk about the different mediums
Yes.
and textures?
Yeah.
So we were experimenting with using different acrylic mediums and like drawing them on or using a stencil and pulling the medium through. And we started using different mediums that have different textures also. So there's like some that have kind of like a sand texture that are more coarse.
This is true of any plate that you're putting through a press to protect the blankets and to ease the press, the roller going over the plate. You need to bevel the edges. Traditionally, it's a small 45 on all edges. What I found in this process is you can do all of your glue up to do your collage and then 45 your edges after the fact, because then it bevels anything that's up against the edge too. The question is, why use plexiglass instead of cardboard? It's more durable. It's so much easier to ink. The hard part about the collagraph is the inking part of it, and you can have a lot of time in just inking and not much success. Your success varies widely if the ink is too thick or if the image that you've applied is too thick and it holds ink, it can run. It can be an incredibly different print from, even though it's the same plate, depending on the color and then how it's inked and how it's wiped, all those things become elements. Okay, so now we're going to actually ink a plate. This is all 1/8" plexiglass, and you can, they will cut it for you at the hardware store, but they're not hard to cut with a tabletop saw. So, this is what we're going to ink, and I'm going to move through this fairly fast. I'm using an etching ink that doesn't require a lot of medium. Some of them are thicker than others, and the older ones get thicker. There are many kinds of mediums to make ink. Some of them most of them make it looser or make it sticky or alter it in some way so that you can put it on and take it off more easily. I'm going to, okay, so what I've done was spread that ink out a little bit so it's a little bit more loose. And you basically card the ink onto the plate to apply it. And at some point I found that after I get some ink on here, if you have any questions about anything we've talked about, this is kind of mindless right now. Oh yeah, the first time through it will be through the press, it will be very purple. And now, after I've got a little ink on, I'm going back with a toothbrush and getting it into the cracks around the paper and around the modeling paste, so that, because those are the things that when I wipe the plate, I want to make sure it's densely inked. So I'm wiping the surfaces because I'm going to roll ink over this after I've done this part. And then this is a tarlatan, and it's this one actually is made for Akua inks, but I found actually that the new tarlatans are so stiff, I prefer this. And the tarlatans are harder to find, the traditional ones. Thank you. So now I'm removing what will seem like all that work I just did to put this on. I'm taking it off. But it is finding its way into the cracks around the paper and the shapes around the shapes that the paper have made. So you can begin to see what I've wiped. And if you look at it from the back, you can see how there are areas like there where it's down in the paper, or down in the cracks, it's against the plex. I think the big advantage of plexiglass is it has weight to it. So I put a lot of ink on, I took a lot of ink off. At this point, I'm going to just put it through the press to see where I am. Then I'm going to do this same process again. It will take a little bit less time because it's already been inked once, but I will then roll it as a relief ink and print it a second time. So it will, between this and the next, it will look significantly different. I'm using Reeves BFK heavyweight print paper, which I recommend for almost all print stuff.
So how many times can you reuse that?
As many as you can stand. Valerie said that, you know, you could probably do 20 good prints, but I don't know. I think you could just keep going. They don't wear down. Oh, from this kind. So this is a real simple way to register something like this, which is draw a square around your plate, or square around your paper and center your plate and draw a square around that. So, but it will give you clean borders. So I pre-wet this as a kind of a package, this paper, and you do want to dampen your paper because it will, if it doesn't tear, it will at least do this. I don't know if you can see this badly stretched paper, so it's kind of critical to most plate kinds of printmaking, but particularly I think to the collagraph because it varies so much in depths. Isn't this a great little press? So this is the first time I've actually put something through that I've inked on this press. So we'll see. That's another lesson to be learned. I did it dry at the studio, and I just went off my plate. I'm going to go back so we end up in the same spot. So I wiped this a lot. So. Too much, but you can start to see. I can see what I need to do when I re-ink it, how I want to ink it differently. So, and now it has ink on it, and it has ink in some places that I didn't get ink into. But it's kind of interesting. This is the first time I've printed this plate, and it's kind of interesting to me that the textural part is holding ink, and the plex, which you see the letters that are smooth. They're not going to. That's kind of, I thought the ink would be down in them. So you learn a lot this first time through. Well, what surprises me is I thought that I was going to have more ink around the inside of these letters than I do, but they are showing up as, yeah. Because they're low surface instead of a high surface, I thought they would be holding ink differently. This ink is pretty loose and I don't need to wipe it as much. But I can also see like the edges that I didn't get ink into, which this print, it doesn't matter so much, but the next time I'm going to roll ink over this, I want that to be dark around the edges. And it's in one of the things about press, anyone who's ever worked with a press versus hand printing, you immediately see the possibilities. Even if you don't want to do traditional printmaking, it's just incredible to have that much pressure at your disposal to transfer one thing to another thing. So the issue though is they weigh like tons. So put it through the first time and you want to get more ink off a second time, which is called a ghost when you reprint the same plate without re-inking it. That's a ghost. And sometimes it's helpful just to apply a little bit more pressure as it goes through the second time to get that last little bit of ink that's down in a crack, whatever, out. I used the old blankets as well at the studio. The new blankets are good, particularly for etching, so you're really trying to do some fine work. Most of my monotype, it's not fine work, it's like I like weight, thickness to ink. So we're gonna roll some cadmium orange, isn't it? Nasturtium yellow. And this is the reason that you put it on the plate. Typically, is you're rolling ink onto something else, and so you want it to be a thinner layer before you start taking it up with the roller, before you put it down on the plate. Now, I found when I was inking some of my more complicated plates that I sometimes would cut a stencil so that I made sure when I was using a brayer to put ink onto the plate that I didn't get it someplace I didn't want it. So maybe I would, in this case, cut the reverse out for the hawk that's there so that when I ink this, it wouldn't get on that, or I'm not doing that here, but that could be an option. And now you can see why in a second. So if I had, held a card here, if I wanted it to be, precise and just have inked the orange on what was the raised portion of this, it would have been easy to slide a piece of paper there before I inked it. But since I've got ink on it there, I'm going to put ink on it up here too. Okay, I'm going to print a ghost this time.
So the towel is how you're moistening it? No?
it's
It's just,
so we pre-wet the paper and it's in second plastic.
Or I used to.
They're very nice.
Thank you.
yeah, sure.
Oh, wow.
Love the ghost.
So who knew I was mixing brown? Hi. So that's pretty interesting. Pass it around. So, in conclusion, that's what a collagraph is. It's a very simple process of making a plate. That's half the fun. And sometimes it's maybe all the fun. I like the plate. I like the plate a lot on this one. So, I actually have sold a linocut plate one time, so maybe that's what this future is. So.
At this point, there's still probably oil on there, so he could even ink it again in orange. I mean, you can just keep
Going.
pulling, options and
Yeah.
using up that ink.
Absolutely. And a lot of what I do is, all these people have inspired me that I've printed with through the years, and Bonnie Wilkins was a person that said to me, you're not done when it comes off the press. You can now cut it up and make something else out of it. So there are elements of this that I could see used as a collage. So lately for the last 4 years, I've been taking elements from prints that I came off the press and scanning those and then doing collage from my print work in the computer with Photoshop. So making new compositions from the printed papers. So that might be what I would do with that. I don't know.
You could put a different color on the plate and run the same paper through it, right?
Yes, you absolutely could do that.
So my question is that when you do that, how do you make sure you position the paper?
If you're going to do that, this is still one way to do that. If you saw the registration here, you register the paper to the outside line and you put the plate in the same place always. What happens quickly is when it goes through the press, moisture was absorbed from the paper here, and that paper begins to shrink as it dries. So if you're going to do this, my experience is you need to print over it again relatively soon for registration, or Deborah can speak to other ways to register, and Debbie too.
Yeah.
So, any more questions or complaints? I don't know. Thank you all for coming, and